Thanks, Rich, very much for the remarks, but more importantly, thanks for the leadership you provide, NBR has provided throughout the years on all the critical issues that deal with the Asian region and America's leadership abroad. Seattle was a great example of the disconnect between the benefits of free trade and workers who actually have jobs connected to it, and it really opened my eyes, Ambassador, as to how we need to be able to bring that down to the real level of working people if we're going to continue to expand trade. I will note, when I was in Seattle, Rich, on the bus, they were taking us through the hordes of protesters. I did notice that some of them were a little disconnected themselves. I'm not sure they knew if they were protesting the World Trade or the World Series. They were just there, to be part of that whole mess. I'm glad to be the appetizer in front of the main course of Admiral Blair, Ambassador Barshevsky, Ambassador Lee, and Ambassador Chan. They will provide the real substance and meat to this discussion, but I'm honored to be part of it. Going straight to the bottom line on the implications of U.S. policy, engagement with Asia is critical and in our interests, especially in the area of trade. A pending agreement with Korea, ongoing negotiations and exploratory talks with other countries in the region, including most recently the P4 countries, and increasing U.S. market share in China. Those are among the opportunities that we should be seizing upon and acting upon right now. I'm, like others, concerned about the growing trend of isolationism that has manifested itself in the midst of a presidential campaign right here in the United States and the U.S. Congress, which some of our actions today, I think, have real and immediate consequences for our foreign policy abroad. I've noticed that citing declining U.S. prestige overseas, some of our presidential candidates have vowed to restore America's respect abroad by ending the go-it-alone policy of the current administration. Yet, they announced that they will unilaterally renegotiate existing trade agreements or call timeout on important Doha trade negotiations. Just the opposite of what we need to be doing. Some in Congress blame the administration for the current economy and vow we're going to create U.S. jobs here and level the playing field for our workers, but then our actions speak just the opposite as we move to reject or delay free trade agreements that could create jobs here in America and level the playing field for U.S. workers and companies. I was excited last year and optimistic when leaders in Congress and both parties sat down together and worked out agreements on environmental and labor issues for pending and future trade agreements. I felt like finally we were starting to speak as one voice. I was very discouraged when last month the House, under the Speaker's direction, took the unprecedented step of calling a timeout, stopping the clock on consideration of the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. It seems to me that we are turning our back on one of America's key allies and sending a terrible message around the world. I hope all of these are temporary measures and not an indication of where our long-term actions are going to be. With Korea Free Trade Agreement on hold, I am concerned that this trend of isolationism will seriously undermine our interest abroad, particularly in the Asian Pacific region, and have negative consequences here at home, economically and in other areas, especially since other countries are moving forward so aggressively without the United States. More open trade, particularly where the U.S. can advance our interests by opening markets abroad for what we sell, increasing our economic footprint in Asia, that will only strengthen the U.S. economy. It won't dampen it. It'll create U.S. jobs, not kill them. It'll raise our standard of living, not lower it, and it'll help deepen critical U.S. alliances, not weaken them. The U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement follows what is a half-century-old security alliance between our two countries. This historic agreement, the largest of its kind for the U.S. in 15 years, exactly the size and scope of agreements we should be pursuing as a country, will eliminate tariff and other trade barriers between the two countries and establish a trading partnership that will help increase the competitiveness of both of our countries vis-a-vis China. It'll give U.S. workers, businesses, farmers, and ranchers access to millions of new customers, adding billions to our country's economy through exports of goods and services. I will say, as one of the stronger supporters of the Korea Free Trade Agreement, and believing that with the right awareness, the right education campaign, there will be support for that agreement ultimately in Congress, I do want to warn, I think we will squander the opportunity to even fight for and have a vote on the Korean agreement unless we can prove with credibility that the beef issue is resolved once and for all. I deeply respect Korea's political processes, as I can only hope my friend Ambassador Lee does ours, but this issue has lingered far too long. It is adding fuel to the fire of those in the United States who oppose the agreement or skeptical of the false starts in beef, and it has to be put to rest once and for all, or we will never have this opportunity. Never. In a bigger sense, and Rich, I think NBR understands this, and so these distinguished panelists we have here, at a time when the entire world is shaping the global market to create new opportunities and new customers for their companies and their workers, U.S. Congress is benching itself. I think this undermines our leadership abroad, sends exactly the wrong signal that the world's biggest economy is afraid to compete, unwilling to tear down the artificial barriers that can help lift millions of the world's poor out of poverty. And we have to make sure that America doesn't fan those flames of protectionism around the world because they are so easily done these days. We in Congress ought to act now decisively to reassert America's leadership abroad, to build stronger bridges to our allies in Asia, and begin to speak as one voice when it comes to trade policy. Congress needs to schedule an up or down vote on the Korea FTA this year, as well as on other pending free trade agreements with our partners Colombia and Panama. These are countries that already sell their products into our country, have made tremendous progress on democracy, labor rights, and rule, and we need to move from the temporary arrangements of preferences to the permanent partnership of free trade agreements. In Congress, we need to make it clear by our actions that we have a bipartisan agreement in future in trade. We have to stimulate the American economy and our interests abroad the right way through trade. And if you look at it, it seems to me the world has changed, and unfortunately we are not changing with it. It is no longer enough to simply buy American. We have to sell American as well, sell our products and services throughout the world. We can't afford to call a timeout on seeking new opportunities to sell our products and services throughout the world. And today, due to aggressive efforts by our competitors, when U.S. companies try to compete overseas, we find that 3 times the world is tilted against us. That level playing field is uphill against our companies as they try to compete. That is not fair to American firms or their workers. Open trade is working. We ought to insist, and Scott Miller has heard me say this 1,000 times. He's tired of it. But my belief is there is this great principle of free trade, and it is if you or I build a better mousetrap, we should have the freedom to sell it throughout the world without government interference. And if someone else builds a better mousetrap, we should have the freedom to buy it for our families and for our business. That freedom to buy and sell and compete, to me, is as important a freedom as any that we enjoy. And we as America ought to be the ones pushing hardest to expand that freedom throughout this world. The trade agreements we have are working, even though we have them with just a few countries that comprise only about 7% of the entire world market. They buy nearly half of everything America produces and sells abroad. These are great customers, and we need more of them. Singapore is a great great example. Since that free trade agreement went into effect, can I borrow a glass of water? I won't be returning it now. I get so choked up over the Singapore free trade agreement. better than winning American Idol. Which was a Texan, by the way, last night. I should know. Anyway, Singapore, which I'm so emotional about, is went into effect. They're our 11th largest export market. Our sales have increased by more than half to Singapore just in those few years, and now Singapore is the third largest destination for foreign direct investment. So it is already helping in many ways in establishing Singapore as a regional hub for technology and services. And likewise, U.S. sales to Australia, another partner, has increased by a third since our agreement went into effect in 2005. And we're seeing in countries, regions like Central America, that agreement's barely been in place. Yet we've turned a $1 billion trade deficit into a $3 billion trade surplus, and the benefits we're seeing in Central America are occurring not in their major cities, but out in the rural areas, exactly where we would hope we would increase the standard of living in the Central American countries as well. And then last year, well before the dollar became weak, something happened that didn't get much notice, but should have. For the first time in a while, the lines crossed. The growth of U.S. sales abroad exceeded the growth of the imports that are coming in. So the compass is turned the right direction. We need to encourage more of that, not discourage it. And the way you encourage it is to continue to open markets and to lead. Final point on China. I know that there are real concerns in Congress on both sides of the aisle with our friends in China, from the currency issue to product safety to subsidies and piracy of intellectual property. These are real concerns. My thought is we ought to approach our relationship with China with a very thoughtful strategy to resolve our trade disputes to our satisfaction, but do it in a way that doesn't risk a boomerang of economic pain on American family budgets and our economy. It is, as I often say, something that we ought to be using a scalpel to deal with, not a sledgehammer, because the consequences are real if we do it the wrong way. Final thought, in the big picture, I think deeper and more thoughtful U.S. engagement in Asia will only strengthen our interests, both to our interests, and it's a critical tool to achieving this is trade, and we shouldn't retreat from this critical challenge and opportunity. The time really is now for more trade, not less, more leadership, not less, and Congress ought to be leading the way. Many of you in this room can help make that happen through your relationships, with your discussions, with your studies and research on trade, and I would ask for all your help in engaging Asia and U.S. in a deeper relationship. With that, thank you, Rich. If we do it the wrong way. Final thought, in the big picture, I think deeper and more thoughtful U.S. engagement in Asia will only strengthen our interests, both to our interests, and it's a critical tool to achieving this is trade, and we shouldn't retreat from this critical challenge and opportunity. The time really is now for more trade, not less, more leadership, not less, and Congress ought to be leading the way. Many of you in this room can help make that happen through your relationships, with your discussions, with your studies and research on trade, and I would ask for all your help in engaging Asia and U.S. in a deeper relationship. With that, thank you, Rich.